What is up, everyone? It's Quinn here, and in today's video, I'm going to be going through my top 40 Week 4 wide receiver rankings, splitting these guys up into different tiers. I've already posted my running back rankings, so if you haven't seen that one, you can check it out after this video. Any questions, drop them down below. If you enjoy, like, subscribe, all that good stuff. But let's just dive right into the rankings here, and starting off in Tier 1, I have 6 Tier 1 wide receivers. We're going to start off with Jamar Chase going up against the Panthers, coming off a monster Monday Night Football game. Slow start to the season. There really shouldn't have been any concern. He's a stud wide receiver, playing with a great quarterback. Fire up Jamar Chase as a high-end wide receiver 1. Then we have Justin Jefferson going up against the Packers. He's getting that quarterback support from Sam Darnold. We know the talent's there. He's a locked-in top option. Then we have Rashee Rice going up against the Chargers. At this point, he's the fantasy wide receiver 2. It doesn't look like he's going to be slowing down. The volume's there. The big plays are there. The touchdown upside is going to be there. Rashee Rice is a locked-in wide receiver 1 play. Then I have Amon-Ra St. Brown going up against the Seahawks. A couple of nice bounce-back games after Week 1. Going with Marvin Harrison Jr. as my number 5. This is a great matchup here against the Commanders. He's looked good Week 2, Week 3. The Commanders have allowed the most points per game to the wide receiver position. So Marvin Harrison Jr. is a great player, and this is just a smash matchup. And then the final guy in this tier is going to be Nico Collins. And I'd say my only main concern here is the hamstring injury he's dealing with. But you look at the matchup here, I like it. You look at Tank Dell's injury, I think that definitely gives both Nico Collins and Stephon Diggs a bump. Now shifting into tier 2, starting it off with Chris Godwin. And I will say that both Godwin and Evans have been on the injury report, but I think both of them should play. I don't think either of them are dealing with anything too serious here. Godwin has been super impressive through 3 weeks. I would have him over Mike Evans rest of season. Maybe that's controversial. I know Evans was the better guy last year, but in previous seasons, they've been neck and neck. Godwin looks like the guy who has the slightly better role, at least early on here in the 2024 season. Then I have Chris Olave, kind of a slow start, had a decent week 2, really nice week 3. I think he's going to be the wide receiver 1 here on a Saints offense that's looking pretty good, even if week 3 was kind of rough. Then I have DK Metcalf. Metcalf's been great over the last couple of weeks, and this is just a great matchup on top of it. The Lions have allowed the second most points per game to the wide receiver position. And then the final guy in this tier, Davante Adams, my wide receiver 10. Not the best matchup, but we just saw Malik Neighbors have a great game against this Browns defense. So Davante, like him as a back-end wide receiver 1. Now, before I jump into tier 3, I do just want to mention the players that I'm expecting to miss this week. We've got the 2 Eagles wide receivers, Devonta Smith with a concussion, and then A.J. Brown with his hamstring. Also, I apologize if you hear like weather noises, some wind in Florida right now, so the hurricane weather has not been great. Not sure if you guys are even going to be able to hear it, but I'll just throw it out there. Cooper Kupp, don't think he plays this week. And then it looks like Tank Dell is going to be out this week with injuries to his ribs. Now looking at tier 3, we have Garrett Wilson, who's in an interesting spot here. He's been a little bit underwhelming through the first 3 weeks. The matchups have been rough, and it doesn't really get any easier here. He draws the Pat Surtain matchup. I will say, I know like Evans didn't have a great game. I know George Pickens didn't have a great game in week 2. I don't think this is like an insurmountable matchup. Pickens actually performed pretty well. He kind of just got unlucky, had a touchdown called back. He had a deep reception called back for an offensive hold. He had a pass interference. I believe that he drew on Surtain. So I don't think this is like, Wilson's just dead in the water here in this matchup. He's had a 28% target share through 3 weeks. I think he'll be fine. Then we have Mike Evans going up against the Eagles. I like the matchup here. Like I said, I do prefer Chris Godwin just a little bit more, but I still like Mike Evans in the tier right after him. Then I have Stephon Diggs, who I think definitely gets a big jump. With Nico Collins pretty clearly being the top dog there, you kind of have Stephon Diggs, Tank Dell competing for that like wide receiver 2, wide receiver 3 spot. With Tank Dell out, you just have like 2 stud wide receivers here. So Stephon Diggs, like him, like right outside the top 12. Then I have Tyreek Hill going up against the Titans. It's always going to be tough to rank Tyreek Hill without Tua because you have a player who's so insanely talented, but the quarterback play is just such a question mark. So I feel like high-end wide receiver 2, it's a fair spot. Obviously, talent-wise, he should be higher, but the situation is just not ideal. Then my wide receiver 15 is going to be Brandon Ayuk. I'm going to talk about Debo a little bit later on here. There's definitely some uncertainty with this wide receiver room. I will say that maybe I'd bump him up over Tyreek Hill if Debo does not play, because then you have Debo, Juwan Jennings, all these dudes can be involved. But right now, this is where I have Brandon Ayuk. Then I moved up Deontay Johnson a few spots here. I like the matchup here against the Bengals. We saw them just get shredded by the Commanders through the air. He's coming off a great game week 3. I don't think like week 3 with Andy Dalton is going to be an every week occurrence, but he's the clear number 1. You have Adam Thielen on IR. Obviously, Dalton's a massive upgrade, so I have moved up Deontay Johnson from my first set of rankings. Then I have Zay Flowers going up against the Bills. I think this is a much better game script for him. I don't think it's going to be overly run heavy. Probably going to be a competitive game, which means that Zay Flowers can definitely rack up some receiving volume. Then I have Drake London going up against the Saints. Kind of a bad week 1, really nice week 2, week 3. I feel like you should feel pretty good with what we've seen out of Drake London so far. And then the final guy in this tier is going to be DJ Moore, dealing with a groin injury, but he should play. He's been fine through 3 weeks, nothing crazy. I do think there are going to be better games ahead, but right now, mid to back end wide receiver 2, I think is a fair spot for him to kind of slot in at. Now shifting into tier 4, I'm going to start off this tier with T. Higgins. I know he didn't have a great game back, 6 targets, 3 receptions for 39 yards. There were definitely some plays out there that, if things go a little bit differently, it could have been a solid game, could have scored a touchdown. Joe Burrow just missed him. I just think we have enough of a sample size that when T. Higgins and Joe Burrow are both healthy and out on the field together, T. Higgins can give you like that fringe wide receiver 1 production. The ceiling's not going to be great because you have Jamar Chase there, who's the clear-cut number 1, but I still think T. Higgins is very playable as a wide receiver 2. Then I have J-Mo going up against the Seahawks. I just really like the volume we've seen from him through 3 weeks. 23 targets, 3 carries. You look at J-Mo as a player, he's going to be a touchdown threat. He's going to be a big play guy. He's going to be fairly efficient. So if you're giving him like 8, 9 opportunities a game, I think more often than not, he's going to pay off for fantasy. And then I talked about how I would talk about Debo. This is where I have him here as the wide receiver 22. It's tough because if I knew he was 100% healthy, going to play a full workload, then he would definitely be in like that tier 3 area. But he's back at practice. I will say if Debo is out, then this is pretty much where I'd slot in Juwan Jennings. Like he'd be in this like top 24 area. But we're just going to have to monitor the reports with Debo. We'll see if he's limited. We'll see if he's a full go. We'll see if he just ends up getting ruled out and they kind of play it safe. I wouldn't be shocked if he didn't play just because you have Ayuk there. You have Juwan Jennings coming off a monster game. Looks like George Kittle's going to be back. CMC, already going to be missing time at this point. I could see them, not wanting to risk it with Debo, but it's still kind of up in the air. So if you have a question about him, you can definitely, hit me up in the comments later in the week. I'll try to give you a new answer. And then we have JSN here, like the matchup going up against the Lions, like I talked about with DK Metcalf. Then to wrap up tier 4, this is where I have Jaden Reed, and this is going to be assuming he gets Jordan Love back. I think some people might be a little bit higher on Jaden Reed. I still don't think this wide receiver room is like completely figured out. I know heading into the season, people view Jaden Reed as the top guy, Christian Watson as the number 2, Dobbs as the number 3, Dontavian Wicks as the number 4. We saw week 1, right? Jaden Reed was awesome. He had the rushing touchdown. He had the receiving touchdown. He looked like the guy. But in terms of routes run, the volume, like it's not like Jaden Reed was running away in any of those areas. Like I think Dobbs and Watson still ran more routes than him. The targets were fairly close between all 3 of those dudes. So I do give Jaden Reed the edge, but I don't think this is like locked in Jaden Reed is the clear top option rest of season. He definitely could be, but I do think, potentially Romeo Dobbs is going to be more involved than we think. Christian Watson could definitely have some big games in there. So I still like him as a wide receiver 2, but just, throwing that out there. And then my tier 5, 4 players here, Brian Thomas Jr., Terry McLaurin, Rashid Shaheed, and then Amari Cooper. For Brian Thomas Jr., I just like the talent. His usage has been pretty solid. I do expect him to be the wide receiver 1 here for the Jaguars. Then Terry McLaurin, rough week 1, rough week 2. The volume was questionable, was not being used down the field. Then we see him week 3. He balls out. He connects on 2 deep passes with Jane Daniels. I think it is a great sign moving forward. I think the upside is there, but I'm still not like all the way in thinking that that's going to happen every single week. Do think it's a decent matchup here against the Cardinals. And I mean, for Terry's sake, I like Jane Daniels as a player. Hopefully they, keep this connection rolling and he finally gets a quarterback to support him. Then I have Rashid Shaheed, who had a monster week 1, monster week 2, came back down to earth in week 3, but I feel like we just kind of have to accept that that's the type of player he is. He's going to be fairly boomer bust. He can hit on the large touchdown, or, he can kind of put up a goose egg like we saw in week 3. And then Amari Cooper here as my wide receiver 28. Saw a lot of people did not like him as a sell high candidate. And a lot of people did not like him. I think I had him like wide receiver 30 before the Thursday night game with Malik Neighbors and CeeDee Lamb now being removed from these rankings. Here's the thing with Amari Cooper. This is not an anti-Amari Cooper as a player take. I think Cooper is a fantastic wide receiver. It's all about this situation. I just can't get overly excited about a wide receiver whose quarterback has a lot of passing volume. Like, Cooper's going to command targets. Deshaun Watson has not hit 200 passing yards in a game. He has 3 passing touchdowns through 3 weeks. 2 of those have gone to Amari Cooper. So maybe Deshaun Watson starts to play better. The passing volume's there. But I just can't really see how you look at this current Browns offense with Deshaun Watson and tell me like Amari Cooper should be a locked-in top 24 guy or like a wide receiver 2. Like I said, it's not a talent issue. We saw week 3, he had a great game, but we can't just completely forget about what happened week 1, week 2, where even though the volume's there, Watson's not even completing 60% of his passes. Like, it's not an ideal situation. Now, this could completely change in a couple of weeks, and Jameis Winston takes over, and all of a sudden I have Amari Cooper as like a top 15 wide receiver. Like, that's definitely in the range of outcomes. If you told me Jameis Winston was starting this week instead of Deshaun Watson, he's probably in there with like Tyreek Hill, Stephon Diggs, with those guys. So this is not anti-Amari Cooper. This is more just anti the situation. I mean, we've seen it, right? A guy like Tyreek Hill, probably a locked-in top 5 wide receiver. He's a wide receiver 14 because his quarterback plays a question mark. See a guy like Garrett Wilson with Aaron Rodgers, he's viewed as a wide receiver 1. When you're playing with, Zach Wilson, those other guys, he's not even a top 24 guy. So just want to throw it out there. It's the situation I don't like. It's not me being like anti-Amari Cooper the player, because he is a fantastic player. And then tier 6 here have Rome Odunze coming off a really nice breakout in week 3. It seems like we might be getting Keenan Allen back, but probably on a somewhat limited basis. And I do think at this point, like, it's going to be tough to pull Rome Odunze from those wide receiver 2 snaps. I have George Pickens going up against the Colts. Think Pickens is the Steelers' clear-cut wide receiver 1. It's just the upside does seem fairly capped within this offense. Then I have Khalil Shakir, who, I mean, has just been super impressive through 3 weeks. 14.3 PPR points per game. He has caught all 14 of his 14 targets. That's crazy. The dude just does not drop anything. Him and Josh Allen clearly are connected. The volume hasn't been great, like less than 5 targets a game, but if he's producing the way he has been, obviously he has the touchdown upside on this offense. I feel like he has to be viewed as the top Bills fantasy wide receiver, at least at this point in the season. Then tier 7, the final tier here, interesting mix of like veterans, some underperforming guys coming back from injury. Starting off here with Xavier Worthy. He's very boomer bust at this point. We saw the huge week 1, week 2, week 3, somewhat underwhelming. I think the Chiefs are going to put up points. We'll see if Xavier Worthy can have a breakout game here, or I guess another one. Then I have Jordan Addison, and this is kind of tough because he's coming off of an ankle injury. So if we're getting reports that like he's limited on a snap count, he would definitely drop. But I'd also say that if we knew he was fully healthy, he'd probably be ranked higher than this tier 5, maybe even tier 4 area when we're looking at the talent, what he did as a rookie, now having the quarterback play with Sam Darnold. So kind of like a placeholder ranking until we get more information about his usage and his injury. Then we have Calvin Ridley going up against the Dolphins. Just a tough guy here in an offense that's not great. We saw he had a nice week 2. Week 3, he kind of flops when D-Hop has a solid game. So I feel like this is just where he's going to settle in as like a back-end wide receiver 3. Not his fault, just the nature of the quarterback play he's getting. Then I have Jaden Waddle, kind of a similar thing, very talented player. The quarterback play for the Dolphins is just a major question mark. Then I have Tutu Atwell here for the Rams. If I was going to play one of these Rams wide receivers, it would be Tutu. We saw he was second in route participation in week 3, so he was getting starting usage with Cooper Kupp, Puka Nacua out. And he's also someone who has at least a track record of producing with Cooper Kupp out of the lineup. We saw his first 3 games in 2023. He delivered 3 very strong fantasy performances. So I think he's definitely relevant this week. Then I have Christian Kirk. I'm not super high on Kirk. He had a really bad week 1, really bad week 2, decent week 3. I'm not all the way back in here. I still prefer Brian Thomas Jr., but I think he could definitely slide in here as like a fringe wide receiver 3. Then I have Christian Watson. Kind of just goes back to what I talked about with Jaden Reed, where I don't think things are set in stone here with like this Packers wide receiver pecking order, but I still do have him here as like the clear distant second from Jaden Reed. Then I have Keenan Allen, who, like I mentioned, could be coming back this week, probably not playing a full set of snaps, but should see a decent role here for the Bears. And then the final guy here, even though I already mentioned him, I did want to throw him in here. Juwan Jennings. It's really just going to come down to Deebo Samuel. So if Deebo is not playing Juwan Jennings, I think you fire him up as a top 24 guy. It's tough to just put him, outside the top 24 with no Deebo coming off an 11 for 175 and 3 touchdown game. But if Deebo is back, I don't think Juwan Jennings playing over a healthy Deebo and a healthy Brandon Ayuk, even though he had that huge game, it's just like those other guys are so proven. Ayuk just signed a huge contract. You're not sitting them for Juwan Jennings. So wide receiver 40, I guess if Deebo does play, would obviously be a lot higher if Deebo's out. And then I guess some honorable mentions here. Cortland Sutton, I think, could have slotted in towards the back end here. The Chargers wide receivers, if Justin Herbert does play, Quentin Johnston, Len McConkey, just a tough matchup. And, with an injured Herbert, Darnell Mooney's had back-to-back solid games. If he logs one more, he's got to crack the top 40 next week. And then Romeo Doubs, I think, also could be playable. Very well will lead this Packers wide receiver room in routes. We'll see if it leads to fantasy production. But that is going to wrap it up for my top 40 wide receiver rankings. If you guys enjoyed, hit that like button, subscribe. Any questions, drop them down below. But thank you all for stopping by, and I will see you in the next one.